there is a term called jnana. Root is jna. If you put it in an English way, you can say it's a JNA or GNA, and the sound of it is jna. We get the English cognition, recognize, etc. And the word knowledge itself, so it means knowledge. Knowledge of what? So there are different kinds of knowledge that we have. The first port of call about knowledge is knowledge of the environment. So we have all these sense organs that act as windows, if you like. This is saying the eyes are the windows of the soul. So we can recognize through these faculties, but not everybody has these faculties. Newborn baby doesn't have these faculties. And of course, something may malfunction in the brain that is connected or disconnected with eyesight or hearing or something. And then you only have 4 senses instead of 5. And they say that if the sense of sight is lost, if your person is blind, then possibly the audial sense is greater. There's a place in India where the Ramakrishna Mission has a big complex called Narendrapur, incorporating many different things, one of which is a blind boys academy. And the blind boys are very skilled musicians because their sense of hearing compensates, I suppose, for the other faculty. Now we can broaden the example. How do we know the world exists? Because we have these senses. But it's not standard. For example, there are other animal species that also have sense organs, but the world seems very different for them. Let's take it as one of the tiniest creatures we know, a microorganism. Give some idea of the size of it. The length is, 1,000th of a millimeter, called a micron, and the width is about half that. So half a micron by a micron, 1,000th of a millimeter, means you cannot detect it with the eyes. That means 2 things. The eyes have a range. But when we enhance that range through an electron microscope, we can see these wiggling things, something like, rod-shaped bacteria, swimming with a tail, propeller kind of thing. And clearly this is something that is living. Now, do they have any knowledge? Yes, they have knowledge. Now, we can't say it has the same knowledge as we have, but it knows its environment. It knows how to absorb nutrients into its system through the membrane. It knows how to make an electrolytic enhanced connection which makes a wiggling take place. It knows how to replicate. It knows how to mutate. It can split. Within 20 minutes, bacteria have then repopulated everything. And one of the most difficult things to do with bacteria is to kill them because they go into dormancy. In other words, they adapt. They adapt to heat, they adapt to cold, but there's an internal thrust for survival within them. And then a thinking person will ask, where does this sense of survival come from? Now, you can't say that just nature has this natural selection, it has this urge to live. It doesn't really explain it. Where is this urge coming from? And if you're fed up with people asking this question, you say, don't ask that question anymore. We just accept. Life is like this. But what is life? The Irving Schrödinger, the great physicist, posed this question in a series of lectures, and he comes up with some interesting answers. For example, he comes to a conclusion there can only be one consciousness. When we talk about jna or jnana, we're talking about knowledge. Now, knowledge has various aspects. Well, the Mundaka Upanishad will split our knowledge into 2 things. One thing would be lower kind of, inferior kind of knowledge. One would be a higher knowledge. And why should we have these 2 varieties? Because the lower kind of knowledge will be knowledge about the objective world. And what do we mean by the objective world? Well, you see, I can come across somebody who says, I know New York. Then the next way, have you ever been to New York? No. But I've seen it on video presentations, I've seen it on a map, I've even spun a globe and I can indicate where it is. And I know that they have yellow cabs and big buildings and so on. The Statue of Liberty is there. But have you ever been there? No. So that kind of knowledge is informational knowledge. That's it. It has a certain function because it gives us a certain idea, overview of something. But then if you haven't been to New York, then the knowledge isn't complete. It's only the person who's been to the place, who's walked the streets, who's driven in a yellow cab, who's seen the Statue of Liberty, who's been inside, who's gone on a tour, who's taken photographs. That person then has a different kind of knowledge. When it comes to the higher kind of knowledge, and if you go back to the lower kind of knowledge, it comes within the realm of science. It comes within the realm of a view of understanding the environment, essentially. Where are things coming from? It's to do with the nature of reality, and good observation, astute observation will come to a conclusion that nothing is really fixed in this realm. But there's a higher knowledge that comes to a conclusion. There is something that is unfixed. There is something that is constant, something that is immutable and never changes. And if it wasn't like that, I couldn't, in contrast, register all these changes so that when I go to a deep inquiry, then I come to a conclusion that there is some entity. Still, this comes within the range of jnana, knowledge. But when I actually experience it, that reality, this is now vijnana. This is the kind of knowledge which is experiential. This is the kind of knowledge that is purely subjective. This is the kind of knowledge that can never be described. Now, in the language of yoga, the inferior knowledge, the lower knowledge, which includes scripture as well, all kinds of knowledge we can put in the realm of science and philosophy, all of this really comes under the term of science. That is, there's an objective world there, and the ancient Samkhya people, the Samkhya system adopted by others, said we can actually categorize this world. We can break it down. Not only can we break it down, but we can actually meditate on it. What do we mean meditate on it? We can get to the essence of every single one of these 24 categories. We put them into 24 categories. Now, if you look at the world, there are more than 24 things, so these are just categories of things. For convenience sake, what's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is that if we want mastery over nature, we can in fact take any one of these, or we can take all of them progressively and master nature, because knowledge is the same as mastery. When you know something, you have control over it. When you know something, you're empowered over it. Now, what are we trying to aim for in spiritual life? And what are we trying to aim for specifically in our Vedanta philosophy? We're trying to aim for that knowledge of the truth, which doesn't change. And in order to do that, we have to somehow make a contrast. There are things which are changing. In fact, when we look at all these 24 categories, all of them are changing. And some of them are not even seen. They're just inferred. The more we delve into this aspect of understanding and evaluating our environment, the more subtle the areas become exposed. And we can imagine these to be layers. Layers of what? Well, they're not layers of fundamental knowledge. They're layers of superficial knowledge. And because this is a relative thing, and we cannot pinpoint what is reality in a shifting landscape, then we have to come to the conclusion that these are not layers of knowledge, they're layers of ignorance. And in contrast to that, the real knowledge, which gives us a fixity, an invariance, will be that which doesn't shift, doesn't change, remains always the same, constant. That is what we're looking for. And why should we look for that? Because we're always inherently looking for it. We're looking for fulfillment. We feel somehow life is not complete. We live a fulfilled life. And somebody who explores the external life of the senses, when they pass away, the polite way of describing their ignorance is, they lived a full life. Somehow they lived an interesting life. They lived life to the full. No, they didn't. They lived life to the emptiness. They lived life in a hollow way, such a way that the next adventure was more interesting, more exciting, that they never got tired of being filled on the one side with something that feeds the senses or the internal desires or the psychological desires associated with them, namely, nobody appreciates me, therefore I'll go and eat something. Or nobody praises me, so I'll listen to some praising things. People who like me and praise me, I'll only listen to those. People who criticize me, I'll block them off. And all of this then is centered down around a wrong understanding. And lifting the layers relieves all of that. And ultimately, when we get to that fixity of position, if you will, that in fact has no position in space. Language is a difficult thing, contradictory. So we can only make a symbolism of it. If you take the Ramakrishna's beautiful saying, to make it very simple, some people have heard about milk, some people have seen milk. That's a kind of knowledge. Both are a kind of knowledge. But the one is not very deep. The seeing is a little bit more information coming in, more data. And then others have drank the milk. It is only the ones who have drunk the milk who can really say, I know milk. And I am empowered over it. Like I can choose to drink it or not. I can choose to enjoy it. I can choose to procure it. That's an element of fulfillment and freedom. That is real knowledge. Vijnana, real, lasting knowledge, experiential knowledge at its deepest level. Now we have such a thing as Jnana Yoga. There are 4 yogas that are highlighted by Swami Vivekananda. He gives lectures on all of these and embodies them in an emblematic symbol of a swan, of a lotus flower, of waters, of a sun, and of a serpent. Why would we do that? Because the serpent is indicative of the yogic imagery of a coiled up potential that is uncoiled, and we can consciously and deliberately uncoil it. Now that indicates really that we have not one level of consciousness. We feel that we're operating in there all the time, but we're not. We have several layers of consciousness. You take the conscious world as, let us say, one stage, one level, something like 3 levels being there. This one is in the middle. And part of it is conscious experience. As you're listening to me, if the mind is not wandering, then there's a conscious experience. You have chosen to listen, and maybe some of you are writing notes or whatever it is, or maybe you're recording it, something like that. But the evidence of this conscious choice is that we have deliberately decided to steer our attention in a certain direction. The consciousness, in a sense of being concentrated, an element of controlled energy going on. But as we're doing this, as we are consciously aware of that, something that we can control, something unconscious is also going on. Because maybe you had supper and maybe the food is being digested. You're not responsible for that. It's happening by itself, and we have every faith in it. We don't pay any attention to it. And we can't say that there are two entities there. One thing is digesting our food on the one hand, and the other one is consciously talking on the other. These two activities are taking place simultaneously. So this unconscious area within us, this subconscious area within us, is a layer of consciousness, or we can say subconsciousness. And we can imagine it in a diagrammatic form that our conscious life is in the middle, and below that, if you will, is the subconscious area where things are going on, and they come out on display in dreams, and they come out in display in memories. And they are there. Another level, an aspect of it is doing all the physiological functions, even when my attention is not directed toward, such as, for example, sleep. Now, the yogis say, aha, there's another layer, another level. Above the conscious mind is the superconscious mind. And accessing the superconscious mind, we get tremendous inspirations and insights. We get another level, a layer of knowledge. We can say that on the unconscious level, it started off with conscious experience, and that seeped in and became incorporated, as it were, in our psychological DNA, so to speak. It is there, but it is all learnt. If supposing we are able, as the modern evolutionary biologist does, is to trace all our ancestry back, let us say, to that single-celled organism, that bacteria, well, that bacteria has learned. It's learned how to swim, it's learned how to survive, it's learned how to absorb nutrients, it's learned how to, the automatic action of bringing an automotive knowledge that brings in nutrients through the membrane in a selective way and gets delivered, and the reaction of it is movement. And without that food, without that conversion of, let us say, minerals, for example, one certain kind of bacteria will absorb iron and will absorb sulfur. So that kind of bacteria will take that in, and what will it excrete? Because that's the whole mechanism. It takes in, it absorbs, and it excretes what it doesn't need. What is that excretion? It is a ferrous sulfate. It is iron sulfate. In other words, the iron was converted into a salt. It was converted into something. Some oxidation occurred. And that oxidation creates a movement and energy, we call it life. Supposing that fundamental thing was learned, and supposing later on it was deemed necessary and more advantageous if we group the cells together, and if those cells group together, making a variety of different species, coming out as a human with a complex organic brain, with multiple trillions and trillions of cells, all of each cell will contain a knowledge of the previous experience. In animals, we call it instinct. In humans, we can call it the unconscious area. And the psychological, the subtle dimension of that, memory and so on, we can call the subconscious area as well. But the superconscious area is evident because we don't access it except by accident possibly, or by training. When it comes out accidentally, we have this expression, oh, it came to me. And if it is of a complete revelatory kind, then we can say, unfortunately, because we don't know the mechanism of it, it feels as if it came from outside. So some people have the experience it came from Angel Gabriel, or another person experience it came from gods or goddesses, another person thinks it came from somewhere else. And we find these moments of attunement, natural attunement, to a higher order of things that we now categorize not as instinct, not as conscious effort, but as inspiration. That level of inspiration, according to the yogis, comes out in the subconscious mind, and the coiled up snake really will indicate something like an uncoiled potential, which is deemed to be vaster, much vaster than these other small areas, and which largely we don't really have any experience of. And what meditation does is, it is a process where we now experience it and we start unfolding this potential. But the emblem that Swami Vivekananda created also indicates, you see, there are other things. When we have a tragedy, we weep. When we have a comedy, we laugh. We are human beings with a shaky set of emotions. And all of that is hooked in to a hub, a central hub, which is called ego. There's an identification. I do this, I do that. I am this, I am that. I feel happy, I feel unhappy. They're all centered around this. And as long as it's centered around this, our happiness is not fulfilled. We don't get anywhere. So what to do about it? Can we simply abandon it? We can take all the human energies and traits and convert them into something else, because these are energies. Energy can be converted. One type of energy, one form of energy can be converted into another type of energy. The fact that it is all changing means it's in a flux and it cannot be deemed to be an absolute reality. Broadly speaking, potential energy gets transformed into kinetic energy. But other kinds of energies are there. Chemical energy is there. Nuclear energy is there. Apart from all of those kinds of things. Atomic energy is there. Radiational energy is there. Light energy is there. Everything that is moving in an atomic way, we classify as an energy, the thing that enables something to move or do work. And the sum total in an enclosed environment, universe is an enclosed environment, remains constant, remains the same. It doesn't shift, it doesn't change overall, but its form is constantly changing. And for this reason, we have to look for something which is changeless. So we can choose to meditate on the changing thing and get mastery over it. That's one kind of meditation that is mentioned. And Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras mentions that kind of meditation. It gives us mastery over the lower kind of area that we really call some 24 different categories that we put under a heading of nature. One nature with many, many different forms. What are those forms? Well, the familiar world we have, we can put in as numerically 16 forms. 16 forms, that means if we have 5 organs to register them incoming, organs of knowledge, again we use the term jnana, jnanendriya, then that's 5. Then we have to have 5 organs of reaction, that also takes place. So we have 10. That eyes, ears, nose, you see, all indicating the various senses. In other words, an interaction between ourselves and the world. And an additional faculty must be there called mind, which then goes and interprets all the data, a kind of central headquarters, literally headquarters, that comes and assesses it all. Now, there must be 5 objects that correspond to the 5 sense organs that receives the data. So now we have 16 things, 5 objects, 5 organs of knowledge, 5 organs of action, and mind, 16 items. This is our familiar world. And we can see how many subcategories there would be in this, and what variations there would be in this. Modern science takes a close look at this and comes to an astonishing conclusion. Things are not what we are reporting. What we are reporting is just an interpretation of what lies underneath. And what we're experiencing has certain laws to it, which we'll put under causality. There's always a cause for something. If we investigate it properly with the question why, we'll find out a cause. And then we'll find a cause of the cause, and so it goes on. And generally speaking, it's called general relativity. It is our world. Now, if we simply draw a line and say, well, that's our world, then we have some difficult questions to ask. One question might be, well, why should there be any moral values? Why should there be morality? Why should there be ethics? Why should there not be selfishness? If we're born in a moment, die in a moment, and there's no point or purpose to it, then we may as well live our life with the philosophy, make hay while the sun shines. And if you say utilitarianism, we do it, that means we'll do it to make us happy and to make others happy. It's all right. Happiness is the thing. Well, that if this happiness is essentially a selfish thing, so why should we do good for us to be happy? Why can we not do the most disastrous, terrible, immoral things if it serves our purpose? Why should we not take advantage of others if it serves our purpose? Why should we not steal? Why should we not deceive others? Why should we not kill others if it serves our purpose? That question arises, and there's no satisfactory answer from the position of the world is simply a purposeless thing with seemingly a beginning called birth, an end called death, and in between, well, we make our own purpose, our own happiness. It's called utilitarianism, or consequentialism, but utilitarianism, and that is a philosophy. But you see, it's only related to 16 categories out of 24. There's no depth to it. It's taking this world, which is changing, for something which is unchanging, something which is impermanent for something that is permanent. And there's no real depth to it, nor are there any answers to it. So we have to go deeper. And so when people say there is something deeper, in fact, at the very depth, there is a supreme entity. There is something like a God. There is a soul. All of these things. Where is this originally coming from? Now, if it was coming from just so-and-so told me, then we have to be a little skeptical about it. But if it's coming from some entity that is experiencing it from the superconscious area, from the elevated area, the revealed area, the uncoiled area, then that makes a lot of sense. And all of the saints and sages that put down their experience in terms of scriptures, they all are asserting something is being accessed from inside, and the yogis happen to say, yes, that's superconscious mind. So the superconscious mind in yogic language is called Sushumna, and that creates an awakening bit by bit. Awakening of what? Layers and layers of things which are more accurate, more truthful, vaster, more subtle, more wave-like. And there are 5 of those as well, according to the yogis. So these are called tanmatras, mere elements, and that 5 gives us 21 categories. Another one is a sense of individuality. So we have more than that now. So we have 16 plus 5, we have 21, 22 categories overall, including this egoism. And these tanmatras are subtle areas or fields. In modern scientific language, we can call these quantum fields with a quantum field theory. And these are areas of increasing combinations and subtlety. And are these merely part and parcel of the material world? Yes, they are. They crystallize, they combine, they become grosser. That means new aspects of time and space come in, and wave-like things look like solids. So far, we've delved into the material world and understood that this yogic understanding of things is entirely compatible with modern science. Physics at that level is the most comprehensive in the sense that it's the most reliable, the most tested. Absolutely sure. How it works is a mystery to the materialist. To the yogis, we know how it works. How does it work? It comes from another category. It comes from some willing entity. It comes from a cosmic mind. It comes from Brahma. Now, according to the Sankhyas, that Brahma is just an elevated soul that plays that role in the universe, that's all. But to the yogis, there's something different. So that cosmic mind comes and becomes the author of it and becomes ultimately the manifester of what we call buddhi, our own discernment faculty. And Jnana Yoga takes that and says, please use and apply your discernment about what is real, what is not. And how to practice that, you can mobilize the human emotions, Bhakti Yoga symbolized in Swami Vivekananda's emblematic representation as the sweetness of a lotus flower, detached, in other words. The characteristic of a lotus is it doesn't get contaminated by water, it stands on a stem above the water. A water lily is in the water, but a lotus, its root is in the water, no doubt, but its stem reaches out and opens up. So that's the symbolism of it. Now, what is the practical meaning of it in our own experience, in our own practice? In order to access this superconscious mind, one method, the most popular method, the easiest method, will be to open up our heart. The opening of a heart means not only do we express our feeling, we accept the supreme divine love which flows through it. So it's not only accessing the divine, it's opening up access to the divine, it's opening up our feelings in an expressive way, to the extent that if you want to see this entity that is called God, don't just talk about it, don't just philosophize about it, but sit, weep for 3 days, says Ramakrishna, and it'll come. But then he says, but who will do it? People weep for money, they weep for relationships, they weep for all kinds of things, they weep for families, children, and so on. But who ever weeps for God? So it begins with a yearning, and the yearning ends in tears. Tears of love, tears of devotion, even tears of frustration. Lord, you never came today. And all of this we find in a careful study of the life of this mystic Ramakrishna. But then we are all busy doing things because we have hands, we have legs, and in this world we have occupation, we have to earn a living. In other words, we have to get food. Every person has to do that. And so there is this symbol of the swan going through the water. Water is the water of life, and not touched by it, not blemished by it, but still making sure it glides through. What a beautiful image. Most of us struggle, but the swan is simply gliding. See the difference? Suppose we adopt this thing called karma yoga that it represents and glide through all these things easily and naturally, knowing what? That the whole thing is just pure, unadulterated, divine, unblemished spirit. It is all Atman, your own self. It is all Brahman, the cosmic version of that. It is all one and the same. There is no separation at all. Therefore, no expectation that creates anxiety and stress. And then what is the sun? It is the sun representing Jnana Yoga, this knowledge that dawns on us. And when it dawns completely, it is called Vijnana, the complete revelation on it. That is also necessary, because if you have too much emotion and no wisdom, well, we have to have the inner wisdom. if we have great power over all these elements and no inner wisdom, then it'll only cause us and others pain. And so this central part of meditation is given, and you choose to master the elements. That's one form of meditation. It doesn't give you the ultimate fulfillment, which is freedom. That's a different kind of meditation. Now I'm saying this because one question that was on Sunday, I think it was something about what is the difference between dhyana, meditation, and samadhi. And I answered, and then I felt, well, we should put it in greater depth of understanding. And so that is to be found in Patanjali's treatment of it. Because he gives it, well, not comprehensively, because the sutras are exactly that. They are threads. But when you explore the commentaries on the threads, there are two particular commentaries. One is from Vyasa. Vyasa has some commentary on it. But then there's some sage called Vachaspati who then elaborates on that commentary. And when you look at the two of them, you have a clear understanding of what Patanjali is saying in his sutras. So with that in mind, we can explore what is this opening up of the superconscious mind that culminates in what we call samadhi. That is the fullness of concentration. And what do we mean by it? Not just one thing. Now, I did explain it on Sunday, saying it's like being in a room which has on one side a whole corridor leading to other rooms anyway, that I had to go through. And then finally, on the one side, the final end of the corridor would be a room with a blazing light, and it is clearly the end of the passage. I can be in a position where I can view this, and I can view the journey that I came through on the other side. We put it in the language that we've been using now. So all these categories of existence of this nature, and we haven't finished with it. It doesn't end with the cosmic mind. It goes on further. It goes on to an unconditioned entity, and a state of equilibrium. Bear in mind that the whole universe, according to the yogis, is, and everybody agrees, every school in Vedanta would agree, comprises three components. These three components, sattva, rajas, and tamas, they will be necessary, without which nothing moves, nothing operates. That's the idea about it. Now you can test it out in many areas, including physics, including psychology, and see it to be true. And so all of these are necessary, but the universe goes on with these three dancing components, trying to balance things out, and ultimately a dissolution takes place. Birth, life, death is a universal principle. And what happens is not an absolute death. The universe goes on and on and on. Today, people are trying to get away with, because it's an uncomfortable thing, there are many, many difficulties with the current cosmological theories, where there's a beginning, and therefore we anticipate there's an end somewhere. So if we anticipate there's an end somewhere, then what? Well, a lot of speculation. Either it ends in a thermal equilibrium, in other words, what we call the big heat, a final heat, a destructive heat, a death of the universe, where things get lonelier and lonelier and lonelier, and finally disappear into nothingness. Or a big crunch, where things just converge and then annihilate in this way. And most people are favoring this dissipation of energy, ending up into a lonelier and lonelier view of the universe that ends in its dissipation. We have no problem with this. because it's going into a state of potentiality, and that overall we're calling Prakriti. So let us see. 23 categories, which is the creative aspect, where pure purity is moving out, as it were, and creating such varieties of subtlety and grossness that we call our familiar world and the subtle world behind it. And where is it coming from? An area of equilibrium. Now, the Sankhyas, from which all this comes, don't acknowledge a God, because they say if there's a God, the God must be a soul. And if there's a soul, then it has to be born and die, and so it's just as good, or it's not an absolute. And so they bypass that whole thing. But they do have this Purusha, this ultimate self. And by the time it comes to the yogis have this thing called Ishvara. In other words, nature is there, and nature has a divine aspect to it. That's the yogi's position. So the Patanjali differs somewhat from the Vedanta, believing that this Purusha, what we call also Atman, the self, that is behind all of these varieties in us, and nature, the overall categories that have just been described, are two separate entities, both equally real and both eternal. That's the idea. And yoga goes along with that. As a philosophy, it goes along with that. But since Patanjali also believed that the individual Purusha would be entirely liberated, the fourth section of his sutra says it, and isolated from this Prakriti, he was in fact in complete agreement with Vedanta as to the aim and goal of our life, which is inherently spiritual. So why does this source, the Supreme, cause this Prakriti in the first place? After all, it's very confusing for us. After all, we have all these different categories, all of these different separations, coming down to trillions and trillions and trillions, infinite kind of atoms with atomic structures within seemingly infinite space. Why all of this drama? Why should we not just have this unity of existence and finish it off? And so that's a question which cannot, in fact, possibly be answered. Not in the terms of any man-made philosophy or theory that we might have, but for the human intellect is itself within this Prakriti. So that is why we can't figure it out. And so we can't really understand nature, or we can't understand its nature, the nature of nature itself. And so the great seer, Patanjali, or any other great seer of the truth, may experience the nature of this duality, this Brahman and this Prakriti, the relationship, while he was in a state of perfect yoga. But he cannot communicate his knowledge in terms of logic and language. And so when we come to say, what is this final Samadhi that gives us freedom, we can't describe it. And when Ramakrishna is asked to describe it, what we call Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he ends up in tears. I cannot. He's persuaded like a child. Yeah, come on, tell us what it's like. And when he tries, all attempts fail. Because, as the Upanishad said, there the mind comes back together with the senses. And so it's the reality as it seems to be in our human senses that we take. And the reality is distorted. And it is limited. And it is misread. It is a mistake. So we can accept, just as a kind of working hypothesis, that there is an assurance given by those who experienced it that our intellect's real way from this ultimate knowledge, we take it and we deem it a mystery until we uncover it. Until we uncover it. It's not a permanent mystery. And so the answer is in this superconscious area, in this superconscious experience. I think it was the poet Shelley who said, Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. It's a beautiful image, beautiful picture. We are looking at this world as if we were looking through multicolored layers of glass. I often give the example, supposing I don't know any better, I walk into a room and there's a light bulb there, but somebody has put in about 5 or 6 layers of different colored glass. Then the room will all be bathed in that multicolored light. And if I remove one screen, let us say red, from the whole thing, then another form of light bathes the world. And so with every covering that I take away, with every layer of ignorance I take away, I see more of the original white light that is coming through. And that is the process. So we have this description of what is this kind of samadhi like, and we've already described what it's one characteristic of it, that is what is called samprajñata. That kind of meditation is to do with controlling the powers of nature that I just described, because each one of these categories is a power, and the power lies in the more subtle aspect of it. And that comes in some varieties. An examination of it is called savitarka, where we examine all these 24 categories I've mentioned. And then I get knowledge, because knowledge is power, but it is not freedom. We have to mention it, because science will mention all of these things with this reservation. By the way, it's not going to give you freedom. Nevertheless, you can examine it. And then, of course, nivitaka will be about the tanmatras. And so like that. And then ultimately, if you examine the mind, you result in bliss. But the mind is also part and parcel of this nature. And then the other kind of would be asamprajñata, that leads to freedom. And it's described like this, whereby it's not an easy process. Every thought that comes, you take away. Now, that's not easy. So there are different better ways. What is the way? Well, you can go through all of that, but ultimately, any kind of samadhi, when it's not followed by extreme non-attachment, says the sutras, bhava pratyaya videha, becomes the cause of the remanifestation of your position in the subtle worlds. That's the idea. But if you want the ultimate thing, those who don't want any position, special position in the universe or anything like that, or even rulers over cosmic cycles or anything like that, they attain to liberation. We can add in this very life. So when we talk about knowledge, different categories of knowledge, different understandings of it, but the kind of knowledge we want is the higher knowledge. That is paravidya, where we concentrate on the knowledge of our own true nature, and we can only do that by faith, by practice. In fact, you see there are some gradations that Patanjali gives to us. First of all, we get a curiosity about something, and then we get the experience of it, like that, different kinds of processes. And the more we get the experience of it, the more gets revealed. And this requires practice, of course. And practice requires energy and enthusiasm. So success is speedy for the highly energetic, says Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. Well, I hope that's given some insight into subjects of jnana in its various aspects and vijnana, but also touched on some processes which culminate in the complete unfolding of the superconscious mind that gives us inspiration when we are asked, where is the evidence of things which are deemed to be supernatural? Well, we say there's no such thing as supernatural. If you want to find it out naturally, you have to open up the superconscious mind through dedicated practice, systematic practice, prayer, worship, psychic control, one or more or all of these, philosophy, discernment, all of these kinds of things that are encompassed in the emblematic representation of these four avenues of discipline that Swami Vivekananda describes. I think we'll leave it there. So, yeah. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace be unto all.
Thanks, Swamiji.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.